welcome to day one of the final review for pre-calculus. So you're going to all get these little review packets. I'm sure you're really dying to get all this math, 4 pages worth, when I see you in class next. And even though this says final review day 1, and it's all trig stuff, we're really going to start on the last page, which says final review day 4. But this is the oldest stuff, so I feel like we need to refresh this first. So if you remember way back in August when we first met, our first topics that we talked about were domain and range. So remember, we made all the posters and we found all of our great functions and we did all this work. And so really what domain is just all of the x values. Values of a function. And then that was easy to remember that range then was just going to give us all of the y values. And those were things, words that you had already heard before, and so it wasn't really that complicated for you. But there are things that we learned about that was restricted for domain. So really important things that we talked about were the denominator cannot be equal to 0. I remember when we graphed these doing rational functions, anytime the denominator is equal to 0, this creates vertical asymptotes. We'll review graphing tomorrow, so relax about that. And then another thing that was really important that we talked about was square roots. So remember that symbol? Now you guys know that everything inside here, whatever's going on with this function, inside there, remember it always has to be something greater than or equal to 0. Because you know that you can't take the square root of a negative number. So keep that in mind. And then the last thing that we talked about were logs. And logs we haven't done much with until next semester, but they do affect domain. So anytime you do a log or anytime you do a natural log, whatever's inside of here, this function, we'll call that g of x. Oh no, that doesn't look like a very good g. Okay, start over. G of x, that has to be greater than 0. So when we first started out, we had some problems. Just find the domain and range. So if we said something like f of x was equal to x squared plus 5x minus 8, you would think, okay, when I'm looking for domain, I only have to check for these 3 things. Is there a fraction that I need to be concerned about? No. Check that one off the list. Are there any square roots? Nope, no square roots. And what about logs? Do you see any logs in this problem? Nope. So if you don't have any of these things to restrict the domain, then you can just say that the domain is all real numbers. And remember, we use that funny capital R with the double bar on the side. Now with the range, it was a little bit more complicated for these things. So you should know that when you look at this, that this is the graph of a parabola. So what I would expect you guys to do is get out your calculator, your graphing calculator, and when you graph this parabola, it's going to look something roughly like that. Roughly. So here would be the point that you would have to find using the minimum button on your calculator. And then you can plug that into your calculator, remember, find the center here, find what the minimum is. And let's say, I'm making this up, but let's say that this is -3, -10. Your calculator will obviously tell you the correct number. Then you would say that the range would be all the numbers greater than this y value. So y is greater than or equal to -10. And that's basically it for a parabola. Now, if you have something that's a little bit more complicated, that has square roots in it, let's say f of x is equal to the square root of x plus 7. Well, I know, let's see, I have a square root, so everything inside that square root has to be greater than or equal to 0. So all I have to do is take everything in there and say that has to be greater than or equal to 0, which then gives me the domain of x is greater than or equal to -7. So what that means is you can't plug any values in that are smaller than -7. So like if I plugged in -10, I would get -3, and you can't take the square root of a negative number. And then we also like to write this in interval notation. We're going to start at -7 included in the box and then go forever to infinity. And now if you had the square root to find the range, all you have to do is just plug this in. So find f of -7, and then you would just do -7 plus 7. That's equal to the square root of 0, which you guys know is equal to 0. So square root graphs, basically, this one's going to look like this. It's going to start here at -7, 0, and move to the right. So as you can see, all the x values are bigger than -7, and then all the y values are bigger than or equal to 0. So we would say that the range is y is greater than or equal to 0, or an interval notation from 0 to infinity.